I'm sure that you've heard the saying that the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your relationships. I think this is very true. And if you go to any bookseller and you start looking around for relationship books, you'll find romantic relationship, dating, marriage, family, all of these titles, hundreds of titles, thousands of titles. And you'll find hardly any books about friendship. But friends are very, very important relationships that many of us neglect, especially as we get older. Self-reported data, most people over the age of 40 report having just one real friend. Now, one friend can be enough. It can definitely be enough. But what if that friend dies? What if you die? What if you move away? What if things change? We need to spend more time thinking about friendship. 2020 has been a funky year, a really bizarre year, and it's forced most of us to reevaluate the people in our life, the work in our life, how we spend our time. And I think this is a really relevant topic for most of you listening. It certainly has been for me. When a crisis happens, who do you call? Was there anybody to call? Do you need to get better friends? Do you need to deepen the friendships that you have? On this week's podcast, we'll be chatting about friendship. If you're new here, it's the Lucas Rockwood Show. I'm your host. I'm a yoga teacher, a trainer, a serial entrepreneur. I'm a father of 3 international kids. But at the end of the day, I'm a student. I like to learn stuff, so I go out into the world, try to find smart people, writing books, doing research, thinking big things, and I try to bring their best thoughts to you here on the show, so hopefully we can all live a more fulfilled life. If you like the show, here's what to do. Scroll down in whatever app you're listening on your phone and leave a rating and review. It's really helpful if in your review you tell people which show you found valuable. We have over 400 episodes, so it helps people to figure things out. If you have a question for the show, DM me on Instagram. It's at Lucas Rockwood. If you'd like to join our private Telegram group, go to yogabody.com/students. We have a few thousand students in there. You can connect with me and the rest of the group. I kind of do behind the scenes stretching, breathing exercises there as well. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. So hello and welcome everyone. Lucas Rockwood here. Today's show is called Friendship, and I am joined here with Lydia Denworth. Lydia is a science journalist, a contributing editor for Scientific American. She writes the Brainwaves blog for psychology, and her work is supported by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. You can learn more about her new book called Friendship at her website, lydiadenworth.com. Lydia, welcome to the show.
Hi, Lucas. Great to be here.
So we're in a weird time right now, COVID, coronavirus. It really helps people it forces us to all rethink our priorities. And, when I saw this on my calendar, it really made me think in times of crisis how it really becomes clear who you care about. And it makes me think back. I was I've had a couple of major events in my life. I was in downtown Manhattan for September 11th, and I remember calling friends. And I remember being surprised by how few I called. And I had a similar experience now. And so coronavirus happened. I'm in Barcelona. We're very full-on lockdown, and we're kind of right into a second wave. And so over the past months, I've called a number of people. It really surprised me who I called. I wouldn't have been able to guess it. And I just wanted to, before we jump in and talk about health and the importance of social connection, these kinds of things, just kind of start off the conversation that way. How has COVID, reorganization of priorities, forced self-analysis kind of informed these conversations for you?
Oh, it's been fascinating. My book came out in the end of January when this was just beginning really in other places, not in the U.S. anyway, where I am. And I thought my job was going to be to explain to people why they were taking friendship for granted, which many were, and, to kind of rally around the importance of it. And then COVID happened, and what's been fascinating is that, on some levels, it did my job for me because it really did put front and center for people the importance of their social connections. It's that thing where you don't know what you have till it's gone, right? That's a powerful dynamic. But what is really interesting is also part of what you're getting at, which I think happened over time, is that it has tightened our circles a little bit. But on the other hand, what friendship really, one of the fundamental purposes of friendship and evolutionarily is that friends are there for you in a time of crisis when you need them. And we get a lot of the good things. It's very rewarding and fun and enjoyable to hang out with our friends. So we tend to kind of think of it as this frivolous, or slightly frivolous, it's an extra, but it's really not. All that positive stuff is cementing a bond so that when something happens, you're there for each other. But the people that is true of is not going to be your entire social circle. It is usually a much smaller, more select group, right? So there's that factor. But it's interesting to me that you called other people, like not always the people you thought you would, because usually we sort of have a sense of, these are the 4. It's an average of 4, most people say, in their tightest circle that they count on. That can be friends or family. Anyway, but you're on to something there.
I like to start with definitions, and this sounds kind of obvious, but I guess, if we talk about a spouse, if we talk about a life partner, I think people pretty much agree on what that means, right? That's the person we share our life with. And usually that means a home. Usually that means finances. Sometimes that means kids. We share our life with that person. Friends, it's a little more fuzzy. I hear people use, my good friend fill in the blank a lot, especially online. People be interviewing, my good friend Lydia is here on the show. I think, are you really good friends, or did you swap a couple of tweets? Right? And so, and I also think about my own life, and I was extremely social in my teenage years, and my friends, we were glued at the hips. And these days I have some friends who I only talk about like WordPress with, and some friends who I only talk about, like nutrition with. And it just seems like a lot of friends are compartmentalized. And I'm curious, how do you define friendship?
You know what? It actually is an important question, and it's one reason why friendship didn't get studied as seriously as it might have, because it was hard to define. It's that thing where on some level we all think we know what it is, but you're right that like spouse and family, there are actually legal and biological explanations of those relationships, right? Yeah. And friendship isn't that way. So what I think is really interesting is that the new science of friendship that I cover in the book has kind of done 2 things when you're talking about definition. On one hand, it's clarified what friendship is. At its core, it's a relationship, a bond that has 3 characteristics. It's long-lasting, stable, so somebody's a reliable presence in your life. It's positive, makes you feel good, and it's cooperative or reciprocal, which means that people are there for each other, which we talked about already, right? That you're helpful, and that translates into being, like I said, a steady presence, a positive presence, and a helpful presence. It clarified that, but the thing is that, and of course, we can have other layers, and if you ask people what friendship is about, they'll mention things like loyalty and trust, and that can all be important. But I would argue that you really need these 3 minimum things, and that if you have that relationship, those are the bonds that are going to pay dividends in terms of health and longevity and well-being. And also, but what's equally interesting is that if you think of it that way, it blurs the lines a bit between friends, family, relatives, romantic partners, because it's a template for a quality relationship that can in fact cross those lines. So I now think of friendship in that way, not just as scientists used to, or technically it's the people you're not related to and don't have sex with, right? I mean, that's one very technical way of thinking of it. But in fact, it is this quality bond that really provides you some sustenance in your life.
If I understand your story correctly, you spent a couple of years living in Hong Kong. I also lived in Hong Kong for a year in 2005, and I've spent my whole adult life living abroad now. And it's certainly given me a unique perspective on, well, a number of things. But in the context of friendship, it had a really interesting effect for me. I'm curious, how did that affect and inform the work that you do today?
Yes, you're right. So we lived in Hong Kong for 2 years, and I also have lived in France and in England. And but Hong Kong was hard for me. Not gonna lie. I found the expat community there just a little bit hard to kind of get part. Culturally, it's so different from America that it can be harder to cross the lines and get to know local people. I also went to Hong Kong with several school-age children in tow. And so we really needed to put them in a school where they were going to be able to learn. They went to one of the international schools, and we needed to live in the expat community somewhat. But so I found it was harder for me there to find people, at least right away, that I felt connected to also as a partner. So we were there for my husband's job. Many of the partners, and they're mostly women in that environment, are not working. And I was working, but I was working for myself. I was a writer, and I got the book contract for my previous book while we were living in Hong Kong. And so I was working from home every day. So I was very unusual in that I wasn't available to go out hiking or to lunch like a lot of people were, and I wasn't in an office. And so it was hard. Whereas in Brooklyn, where I live most of the time, you can throw a stone and hit 3 people that have a life just like mine. They're creative writers working from home. So I feel in Brooklyn like it's my people, So I had to work harder in Hong Kong, I think, but I also think it's in many ways a useful experience, not just I think it's fascinating and important to get to know the other cultures of the world in the deep way that you do when you live there. But I also think it can help you to understand what kind of a place feeds your soul and what kinds of people you want to be around and where you're going to find those. And it gave me, in my case, Hong Kong gave me a renewed appreciation for why I love Brooklyn so much and how much I feel known and understood there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I lived in Williamsburg before I left, so I know Brooklyn as well. But I had a very similar experience in Hong Kong. I actually had one of the most hyper-social years of my life. I was there in 2005. And I also found it just extremely empty. Yeah, I've lived so many places. I moved every 4 years of my life or less, my entire life up until recently. And Hong Kong was the one place that really I felt like I was in an airport all year. Super interesting, lots of things going on, and I just felt rattled. I just felt it's one of these places that I just could never land. So it's interesting that you had a somewhat parallel experience.
Right? Because we should say there are people who love it. I know a lot of people who love it.
I know lifers.
Yeah, exactly. And there is a lot that's fascinating. And I did make some good friends, but it's a little bit of a shallow place. I'm going to just go right out and say it. It's all about money and trading. That's what it was founded for. There's a banker is the statue in Central, right? Downtown. So it's to a banker. So, and that's all fine, but that's not the only, you need a little bit more than that sometimes. So.
How do you think about friendship and phases of life? My mother just had a birthday, and I was trying to call her, and my mother, she likes to not answer the phone on her birthday because she doesn't like to be reminded she's getting older, so it always irritates me. And so I always have to chase her down, and finally, through my dad, he finally told me she's out hiking with one of her high school friends. And I just thought, wow, that's really interesting. I never knew this woman. I met this woman when I was 40 or something, And
right.
Where I'm going with this is cycles of friendship. I'm in my 40s now. I've got 3 kids. I've got a business. I'm just not a great friend, and I want to be, but I'm not. I don't have a lot to offer. I don't have a lot of time. I'm almost never alone, and I simultaneously embrace it, struggle with it, and then there's these other times in my life where my life is revolved around other people and community and building things. And so I'm curious, how do you think about, in the context of my mother, it's interesting to see her come back to us. I don't know my mother as, socializing with high school friends, and yet she's able to do that now in her late 60s. And that's, it's interesting.
Yes.
How do you think about, phases of life and the role that friendship can play, not just could it play, but, actual time limitations?
Yeah, well, you're certainly right. Time has a whole lot more to do with friendship than we fully appreciate beyond, of course, a lot of us say, oh, I'm just so busy. But fundamentally, time is a piece of friendship in that it takes time to make and then to maintain friends. It's part of why we make so many friends when we're teenagers, adolescents, or in college. You are with your friends all the live long day, right? You're in class, you live together, you eat together, you hang out, you socialize. it's not only that you're sort of never again going to be surrounded by so many people who are about the same age and, potential friends, but that you're actually putting in all kinds of time, because you can spend a lot of time with people that you don't become good friends with, but at least it sort of gives you a head start. And so we do that. And yes, we don't have all the responsibilities and that come with the middle of life, when most people are making a career and having a family, perhaps both, right? And it's certainly true that we have less time in the middle of life, and then we do manage to kind of, as our family, if we have children, as they grow up and out of the house, and as maybe your career is a little more settled, or you retire, or you downshift, you're going to have more time to spend with friends. And that is the pattern that we see across the lifespan. But I really want to point out that it is important at all parts of life to really pay attention to friendship. You're not going to be able to give it the same amount of time when you're 30 or 40 if you've got work and family that you could at 20 or 60 or 70. But I think that we often do ourselves a disservice by thinking that it is something that we can let go entirely. And the thing is, you need to build that bench. And I mean, one of the quotes in the book that stuck with me the most is that an epidemiologist who's been studying the importance of relationships for her whole career. She's now the head of the Harvard School of Public Health, so she's a big deal. And she said to me, "You think of it like smoking. If you wait until you're 65 to quit smoking, it's still better that you quit, right? But damage will have been done. And the flip side, if you wait until you're 65 and say, now I'm going to have time for friends, damage will have been done." And so I would argue that we should give ourselves permission, even you, busy with your 3 kids, and I have 3 kids, so I know, you should, if you change how you think about that time with your friends as being a critical piece, as important for your health as diet and exercise, it might change, your priorities, and it might allow you to find a little bit more time for some of those people. Not all of them. I'm not saying it would be the same, but I just would urge you to think about whether there aren't any windows of time that you could make available.
I think everybody listening, if we said there's people who are good at being in romantic relationships and people who are bad, I think everyone would kind of nod their head. We know people who are just single their whole life, or they're just constantly, flailing through relationships. And so I think that concept of this person is good at or at least good at getting in them and staying in them. I think we understand that. But what does it mean?
Yeah.
What does it mean, somebody who's good at friendship? What does that mean?
I think it means listening, showing up, being reliable, like I mentioned earlier, not being fully self-centered. And I say that and I laugh, but the truth is that so many of us think about the way conversations often go, and somebody else is talking and you're waiting to jump in, but often you're waiting just so that you can talk about how it pertains to you or the experience you had, getting back to me, right? We don't say that explicitly, but that's what we do in our conversations. And I do think that skill of listening really well and of showing up in every sense of the phrase, and that in this time of this pandemic, it doesn't mean you have to show up physically. You can show up by texting regularly or calling or just saying, I'm thinking of you and I'm imagining how hard this might be. There's some people whose businesses are much more badly affected than others. I mean, I'm a science writer, so I've actually hardly ever been busier, right? But that's not true for a lot of people. So just that sort of awareness and paying attention, I think, is a really good place to start.
One thing that I've noticed that other people are guilty of, and I'm guilty of the other extreme, is kind of using friends as therapists. And so they only call when there's a job crisis, relationship crisis, a death, a loss. And I think I'm guilty of the other extreme. I never call. If anything, I only call for good things. I kind of clam up when anything bad is going on. But I think it's I've seen it be a really common pattern that you only hear from people when they're a mess. Their marriage is falling apart, or like right now in COVID, people's businesses are falling apart. And how do you help people think about when it's time to unload on a therapist and when it's time to call a friend?
Interesting. Yes. Well, you're absolutely right that there are some things that are better done with a therapist, and that it's a lot to put on a friend. If you're really ruminating on things, or feeling in serious crisis, that friends have a role to play, but therapists are critical, I think. That said, I think what I would say is more to just sort of keep in mind, to try to notice how you are with your friends and think about how they are with you. And what happens is friendship gets lopsided sometimes. And I think that's an element that you're talking about here, is that it can be lopsided in terms of the emotional demands. It can be lopsided in terms of the physical demands, where somebody's sort of or time demands, like somebody's very needy. Yeah, they just never leave or whatever it is, and the best, healthiest relationships are the ones that are more balanced. And I'm not talking about like a tit for tat, like I had you to dinner, so now you have me to dinner, in the time when we will be able to do that again. It's more like over the long haul, right? Of course, people are going to go through very hard times, and their friends should be there for them. And, when my friends have gotten divorced, or a lot of my friends now are losing their parents, and my mother has dementia, and I have some friends who've been really helpful in getting me through that, especially in that case, people who have been through the same experience, right? And so, but I am aware of there being times where you just need to stop talking then and say, okay, enough about me. Let's make sure that I'm checking in with you. And it's that self-awareness of how you are. I mean, there really are skills that go with being a good friend. And I'd also like to just point out that something that parents can really think about is that we're so often so oriented towards talking to our kids about achievement, and the biggest, best achievement they can master is the ability to be a good friend. It's going to stand them in good stead for their entire lives. And I think we should be a little more explicit about it than many of us are. And we should talk to them about how there are going to be ups. Like, you have to learn this. We don't all arrive in, say, middle school knowing exactly how to handle the social situation. But did you know that 2/3 of kids change friends between the beginning of 6th grade and the end of 6th grade, at least in the United States, where 6th grade is often, a turning point in school. You go to a bigger school. But think about that turmoil, right? And think about all those 11-year-olds in 6th grade who imagine that it's just them, right? And that and if they know that this is part of how it goes, right? And that we do. And what's happening there is you're getting a better sense of who you are, your identity, your interests, and maybe you're now going to be the basketball player, or you're really into theater, or and you start gravitating to the other kids who do what you do, and or whatever it is. There's change. Change is part of friendship. It's part of friendship for adults. Sometimes I sort of joke that change that happens in 6th grade is like a microcosm of your entire adult life change. Like, sure. Right? Like, you are changing friends from 20 to 60 and 70. There will be some continuity and some changes. It's interesting to me that your mom is with her high school friend, though, because one thing I think happens is, and my analogy is that sometimes old friends resurface, and it's wonderful. And it's like going shopping in your closet, in your friendship closet, right? And you find something in the corner that you haven't worn in years and you didn't toss out. And then you're like, hey, this really suits me now. And I think that truly happens with people. I mean, I have that with 2 of my college friends, and we're in our mid-50s now. And we have been in touch vaguely over the years, but now we are accountability buddies, and we're in touch every week, emailing for the last 3 years. And it's been so wonderful. And it sort of came about because we all got together for our 50th birthdays that year. and sort of and then we kind of discovered that some of us were in creative jobs and that it would be helpful to check in with each other. And we didn't invent that. Lots of people do that, but it was nice to find these people who do sort of what I do, but not exactly what I do, so that we were, anyway, the point is, sometimes people come back into your life and that's lovely. And rather than worrying about why you weren't so close the whole time, I think just cherish that you are now.
Yeah.
Go for it. Right.
So you've got this chapter on digital friendship, and this is hyper relevant now, and people have different opinions about this. And I think even more importantly, people have they just react differently to this. I think for most people, it's just unconscious. It's just their natural tendencies. As I mentioned, I left the U.S. in 2003, so I don't really know. I've moved so much. Also, I remember leaving schools and writing to friends in other states in the U.S. when I was 8 years old. So I've had remote friendships my entire life. So for me, writing an email to somebody I haven't seen in 10 years is not at all weird or uncomfortable. I can do it while I'm walking in the grocery store. It's all fluid for me. But for a lot of people, it's a totally different thing. They're like, whoa, where did that come from? And I got to write an email. What am I going to say? And it's a very interesting space. And a lot of people are changing their views on this with COVID and Zoom and this sort of thing. But talk to us a little bit about digital friendships, long distance friendships, maybe people you never even meet. What role can that have for people?
Yes, there's so much to talk about here, but let me try to hit what I think are the main, most important points. So first of all, you're right that COVID has changed the conversation. It's kind of turned it on its head. It always used to be about, a lot of worry about how social media and digital connection was hurting our well-being. And one of the things I discovered there's very recent research to say it's actually not nearly so bad as everybody thinks. Anyway, this is before the pandemic. That yes, there's some negatives and some positives, but they sort of trade off and and the effects are small in both directions for good or for bad. But that the biggest effect is a positive one, and it is the effect of social networks and connection on relationships. And so, what seems to be the case is that your online life and your offline life do mirror each other more than we realize, and that the more ways, the more channels you use to connect with someone, the closer and stronger that relationship will be. So what that means, so you mentioned, for instance, what about people that you're friends with online, but only online? That's got a place in people's lives. Those are often useful for information, or people who are really have a very niche experience that, where you're all in a chat group about something particular. And that's fine. That's not the same thing as your closest friends. And we know this, there have been studies that say that people, it was a Facebook study, but something like 30 or 40% of people's Facebook friends were considered actual friends, or the individuals themselves only considered 30 or 40% actual friends. And that seems about right to me. It's like you've got a closer circle and then you've got a farther circle, and you know the difference. And so the idea that friendship is devalued currency, which some people say because of technology, I think is just not right. We really work hard on maintaining our relationships, how we need them, where we need them. In the pandemic, of course, it was essential. Imagine if we had gone through this without technology and what that would be like. And I think what it's done is for the moment, it has sort of brushed away the concerns and more said, wait a minute, there's actually a whole lot we don't know about the difference, like what's the worth of an interaction with a video chat versus a phone call or an email. And there's a lot of science that's yet to be done. I mean, the science of this is new. So anyway, that's all happening, which is, I think, really going to be interesting to see. And the pandemic has sort of jump-started it. And so, I've been grateful, but it's tiring. Like Zoom fatigue is a thing. It's real. It's kind of exhausting way to communicate.
Yeah, I train yoga teachers, and we have been running everything through Zoom. And I will say that the shared experience that we've been doing is very different than the tele-friendships that I have with friends and family around the world. Very, very different. It's obviously not the same, but we're in people's living rooms for every day for 40 days straight, every evening, and we have shared experience because we practice and study and train together. And that's different than just a FaceTime call where you're looking at somebody's eyes and, if you get distracted, it's rude or it's not rude or, there's all these kind of funny things.
Yeah.
The shared experience, I think it's part of the reason people loop back to college and high school friends, because you took that road trip to California, or because, you got drunk at Mardi Gras, or, these kinds of these kinds of shared experience. That's more than just what you and I are having right now, which is an academic, very interesting conversation, but it's not the same as staying up late around a campfire or something like this, which
yeah, you're right.
I think maybe, this movement towards Zoom could potentially, not bridge the gap, but get us in the direction more of not just staying connected, but actually truly having some shared experiences, especially as, technology continues to improve.
That could be the case. You're right. And I mean, one thing that's interesting is that the thing that technology has changed the most, and I'm not talking in the pandemic, this is before that, is that we imagine it's changed the way we connect entirely, and it hasn't really. But one thing that has changed is what you were getting at, is that there is this permanence and persistence to relationships because like you have moved around the world, right? But you're still in touch, and everybody has your email, or they can find you on Instagram or whatever it is. And in fact, like, our cell phone numbers don't change often, no matter where we live, right? And so that is different. That has changed. And most people think it's a good thing. Some people find it incredibly annoying. They're like, why? I don't really want to still be friends with these people from high school. I didn't like them then, and I don't like them now. And so, you have to make choices about that. But I think it's interesting what you're talking about now. You're exactly right that shared experience is critical. And in fact, there's some long-standing research on children and how they form friends in the first place. It starts by kind of parallel activities, and then it gets deeper when they have a shared emotional experience. And that can be beginning to talk about how you feel about things, but it can also be things like, 11-year-old boys on winning the soccer championship together. They'll never forget that, right? And there's some very strong relationships that come out of that. And I think that's a little bit what you're getting at when you are doing yoga through Zoom. People are having a different kind of experience. And I think it's great that we have been able to do a lot of that now. I'm not sure how many new relationships beyond what you're talking about, which is a very specific kind of thing, are going to get created in this time. But if we are able, most of us, just to maintain the ones we have and strengthen some, the core ones, I think that we're doing, that's okay. That's good enough. That will get us through. And then you have, but you're right. There are opportunities. I mean, people have been very creative with the technology and the way they use it to connect. And I've really enjoyed watching how people are doing it.
Yeah, I really, I'm really optimistic. People call it the information age. I call it the communication age. And I just find that communication is changing. Like you said, people used to know most of their Facebook friends. Now they hardly know any of them. I have this book that I hope somebody writes called The Lost Art of Forgetting. I'm not going to write the book, but I want somebody else to write it. And, about a year ago, I unfriended everybody on Facebook, including my cousins and things like this. And I just thought it was just too much. I couldn't bear to see someone I knew in high school give birth to a child. It was just like these emotional triggers that weren't really in my reality. I was like, I don't have the emotional bandwidth for this. I got to focus on the tasks at hand, And so, and I see the move online from these big, massive sites like Facebook to WhatsApp chats, where we have a bunch of Telegram chats for our students. People are using text message group chats and things like that with 5, 6, 7, 12 people that they actually know. And it's kind of this, we're learning how to use these technologies in ways that actually feed our soul. I think for a long time it's just kind of a fun game that we were playing, like a video game, kind of learning how it works. And now we sort of People are learning kind of mindfulness and mindful use of these things, and I think it's an interesting and exciting time for communication. I'm excited to see what happens going forward.
I agree. I also think it's personal, though. So some people...
You make a great point.
You know,
I live
right?
in a different world. I live in a completely different world. You're right. I'm an anomaly for sure.
No, not actually entirely. I mean, there are plenty of people who I think are with you, but like I have discovered, for instance, because I've been doing a lot of talking to people in interviews in this time, as you might imagine, about friendship and isolation and how to think about it in the pandemic. And some people have loved the ways they're connecting and other people have hated it, and so it is, it's like personalized medicine. I think what's really important is that you figure out what works for you and that you try to seek it out. Like we said, it is about feeding your soul. That's what, friendship should be about, that, and it can be about that. And you only need one friend, really, ultimately, in terms of your biology, the step change between 0 and 1 is the biggest difference, right? Most of us have more than that, and it's useful to have more. I'm not advocating having only one friend, but I'm saying that the message here is not that everybody needs to go out and have big social circles and networks and have big parties all the time, which you can't do anyway now. But it's that you need connection in some meaningful way. What is meaningful for you?
Lydia, great conversation. I know our listeners will want to follow you and pick up your book. Where's the best place for us to send them?
Yes, my website that you mentioned at the beginning, LydiaDenworth.com, sort of feeds everybody into everything else, but I'm at Lydia Denworth on most social media, and the book is wherever books are sold. I mean, you mostly have to order these days, but you can get it, and you can get it in ebook, audio, and hardcover, and whatever you like. And yeah, I hope people will pick it up. And thank you so much. This has been great.
For the first time ever, Yoga Alliance has opened up their bar standard, their 200-hour certification for online-only training. Because of COVID-19, obviously, we can't train in person. And so the 200-hour training, if you don't know, is kind of the gold standard. It's what about 95% of yoga teachers teaching in studios or fitness centers or at home or privately, wherever. It's about what 95% of people use for their teaching credential. And historically needed to spend about 3 weeks in person, which was great. We had people coming from all over the world to Barcelona to train with us. And so when COVID happened, obviously we went online, and we were online only. We always had fusion courses. We were really nervous about the change. Could we do it? Could we actually train people only virtually without hands on toes and these kinds of things? And we're just finishing up our first batch of students. And I have to say, not only has it gone well, in many ways it's gone better than our in-person course. Why? First reason is we have more time, so instead of cramming everything into 3 weeks, we take a full 8 weeks. Second reason is the technology has some real advantages. We can zoom in on students, we do hot seats, we do workshops, we have quite a large training team giving feedback on a daily basis. So you join a live class, you get feedback about your practice, you get up on camera and you teach. It's incredibly interactive, the community is really strong. The short story is I'm really excited about this. It's working great. We have a new batch starting here very, very shortly to learn about our upcoming June course. We've already got a great group of students signed up, and the trainers and I are excited. Go to yogateacherscollege.com and we'll share more details. So if you're thinking about becoming a yoga teacher, if you'd like to make the most of this COVID time, it's a great time to get certified at home. This week's nutritional tip is in response to a question from Zena. Zena says, Lucas, I'm still traveling 20 days a month, most months, and I find it really hard to eat healthfully. I know that you, in the past at least, used to travel a lot for teaching. What kinds of things do you take with you, and how do you stay healthy when you're on the road? The first thing I'll mention, Zena, is that if you're traveling 20 days a month, this is a big challenge. Eating out is just hard. The even health food restaurants use really bad oils and lots of sugar and preservatives and additives. Even the quote-unquote organic restaurants, they end up cutting a lot of corners. That's just kind of the sad reality. So if you're traveling a lot, there's a couple of things that I've found really helpful over the years, and I've changed the way that I travel in terms of what I bring with me. But these days, I'm really strict on bringing vitamins with me. In the old days, I used to get lazy, and I just say, it's a couple of weeks. I'll skip my vitamins for a couple of weeks and then get back to it. But I always take my vitamins with me now. And here's what I currently take, and this is not a recommendation for you, but this is what I currently take. I take a B complex, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin K2, an omega-3 supplement, and a magnesium supplement. And I take all of that with me, and that really helps me to stay balanced. I got on this more comprehensive stack when COVID came around, and then I just realized, hey, this kind of makes a lot of sense going forward. I feel really great. My blood work's looking good, so I'll keep going with it. When I travel, I always take a protein powder. I find that clean protein is one of the more challenging things to find, and it's so easy and convenient to make a protein shake, whether you're in a hotel room or on an airplane or whatever it is, that I always travel with my disgusting pea protein, which everyone makes fun of me for, but somehow I've found to enjoy its grainy disgustingness. And I very often travel with some nuts and seeds and dark chocolate. Dark chocolate, 85% or more, is just a big blob of fat that's really delicious and convenient and easy to carry around. So I'll throw some of those in my bag, and maybe 500 grams or even a kilo of cashews, very easy to travel with. You have to think about the stuff that you can fit in a compact space. I know a lot of people who eat fish, they'll take sardines with them, for example. I know other people will pack other types of nuts or seeds or things that are really dense and dry and easy to carry. But overall, you get into a situation where if you're having to eat on the road a lot, you really need to start eating out of grocery stores. You need to start eating fresh food, because if you end up trying to eat from restaurants, it's very challenging. The one exception is there are healthy kitchens, particularly these cloud kitchens that are being set up more and more all around the world, where they cook a daily menu. And it might be a themed place, it might be a themed kitchen where they're doing paleo or where they're doing ancestral food, or maybe they're doing plant-based food, doesn't really matter. But those places where they're doing daily food and they care about food quality, those can definitely be much, much better options than your typical restaurant. But as someone who has worked and owned restaurants for many years, I'll tell you, even the best of restaurants, unfortunately, end up cutting corners. And if you're eating on the road 20 days per month, I'd encourage you to start eating out of the grocery store, even if you eat weird meals, chopped up awkwardly in your hotel room. I think it's really an investment that would pay off in spades long term. Hope that's helpful. We have a listener question this week from Beatrice. Beatrice says, Lucas, I've heard you mention you have a standing desk. What brand do you use, and where do you recommend that we buy one? I do have a standing desk. I think I'm on about year 5 on my standing desk. Kelly Starrett came on the show and was talking about it ages and ages ago, and I just went to the hardware store and I got 2 sawhorses and a big giant board. I have 2 boards, actually. One of them kind of has this recycled wood that looks kind of nice. I say kind of nice, it's sort of makeshift, but the other one is just like a chunk of plywood, and they're huge. It's probably like 240 centimeters long and maybe 90 or 100, maybe like 90 centimeters wide. So it's a big giant workstation, and it was really easy. I think it took me like 2 hours at the hardware store, and that's what I use. Now, here's the thing. These sawhorses that I have are adjustable, and so I could get the height just right. The right height for me is where the desk is just below my last rib, and you have to get the height right or it'll drive you crazy. I also have my screen up on yoga blocks, and I have my keyboard up on yoga blocks as well. I find that really makes a big difference. I do have one of these mechanical standing desks as well, but I never use it. I never adjust it. I just leave it up, or if somebody leaves it down, I end up falling in the trap of sitting. So I really don't like that. I would really encourage you, everyone I know who has an adjustable standing desk, they either leave it all the way up or they leave it all the way down. Almost nobody adjusts it. It's kind of like anything where you have that option. I don't know, let's imagine that you have a reversible rain jacket, and one it's red on the inside and black on the outside. You're always going to wear the black, right? You never actually use the other. It's the same thing with these adjustable standing desks. The only exception would be if you have multiple people using it, because you will need different heights. But the adjustable one that I have is tiny, it's a little bit flimsy, it's a little gimmicky, it has a motor on it. I just appreciate a fixed height desk. If you're looking to put one together, I think IKEA is the place to go. Don't love IKEA, but they have really easy makeshift legs that you can chop to any height that you want. And sawhorses are pretty good as well too. These sawhorses, a lot of them have these adjustable tops, so you can go up and down really, really easily. And then you throw a board on there and off you go. A couple of words of warning: when you switch to a standing desk, at least for me, I had about 3 months of misery. Plantar fasciitis pain, knee pain, back pain. I don't mean severe, but just like nagging aches, body aches. I was really unproductive at work. I was fidgeting all the time. But once I got past that, kind of the opposite happened. And more than anything, I feel really good. Right now I'm recording. I have been at work for about 9 hours. I've been on my feet the entire time, and I feel great. When I get home, I don't feel like sitting down. I don't feel exhausted. It keeps me energized, keeps me moving. I'm really, really convinced it's great for bone density and a number of things. And I'm so hooked that when I travel, even if I'm in a hotel, I'll stack furniture and things on top of the bed to get something a little bit higher. My energy and my cognitive ability when I'm standing is so greatly improved that I really, really recommend it, with a word of warning that the transition is not easy. One thing that helped me is being barefoot. And so if you have a work station, I appreciate the fact that I'm in a weird work setup. It might not be the case for you, but if you can work barefoot, that's made a huge difference for me. And then having little things to fidget with your feet is really helpful as well. So I have a foam roller down on the floor. I have this little balance ball that I kind of just fidget with my feet. If you think about like dog toys and horse toys, the things they throw in the pens or in the backyard for the dog, it's these kinds of things are really helpful just to fidget with your feet. It keeps your feet busy, keeps your posture changing, and it'll help you to get more and more comfortable. Hope that's helpful. Good luck. Thanks for listening to The Lucas Rockwood Show. If you enjoy the podcast, I have 2 asks of you. Number 1, share the show on social media with your friends and tag me. My handle is @LucasRockwood. Number 2 is please leave a rating and review in whatever app you're listening on. And last but not least, before you go, if you'd like to be on my mailing list, every week I send out information about the podcast, behind-the-scenes stuff, announcements of online classes and special events. I email about once a week. You can do that at yogabody.com/sign me up. And right now we have a free breathing worksheet on that page as well. It's yogabody.com/sign me up. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.